And if you guys would all welcome to the stage our next thesis, Darby Lee Daniel, with hers titled Giving Divorce a Remodel by Requiring Prenuptial Agreements. Let's give her a hand.
The Stantons and the Stocks, two unhappy couples filing for divorce. While both couples fell out of love, their divorce processes differ. Before marriage, the Stantons sat down, spoke about their values in marriage, and drew up a contract detailing terms in case of divorce. After drawing up the contract, the Stantons presented to get their marriage license. 7 years and 2 kids later, the Stantons filed for divorce. The divorce terms were uncontested due to the premarital contract. The uncontested nature of the divorce process required little stress, with a total of 2 court appearances, minute lawyer fees, and reduced trauma to their children. The Stocks married soon after engagement with the plan of staying together forever. 8 years later, the Stocks thought it best to end their marriage and tear apart their 4-person family. They went to the courthouse, filed for divorce, and hired attorneys to represent the parties. The divorce battle extended over the course of 2 years as the terms were contested. They spent tens of thousands on lawyer fees. Mr. and Mrs. Stock couldn't count with both hands the number of court appearances required of them during the divorce. Their children suffered post-traumatic stress disorder and other health issues due to the divorce process. While the Stocks couldn't have predicted their marriage to fail, steps before marriage could have been taken to reduce the financial and emotional trauma on everyone involved. Every 13 seconds, someone somewhere files for divorce. A 2016 study found that 38% of all marriages end in divorce. The United States is rife with divorce. The average length of a divorce process is 9 to 12 months, but proceedings can take as long as 2 years. Divorce process differs depending on what state you're in. However, in a nutshell, the first step is to file a petition, notifying the local judge that you and your spouse want to legally separate. The petition is then served to the other spouse to be signed. Once signed, the lawyers for each spouse begin to negotiate the terms of the divorce. Now, this process differs depending on whether the terms are uncontested or contested. If the terms are uncontested, the case will likely avoid trial, but may go to mediation to flesh out small disputes. Uncontested divorces can be resolved in 2 days, or in extreme cases, a year. If the terms are contested, the case will go to trial so that a judge can rule on the major terms of divorce. Contested divorces can last anywhere between a year to a few years. Once the terms are settled, the divorce is finalized. A resource that can shorten and simplify this process is a prenuptial agreement. 2,000 years ago, Egyptians drew up the first prenuptial agreement. The original agreement was a written contract drafted by the spouse's parents that outlined the property each spouse brought into the relationship. Modern prenuptial agreements are typically drafted by lawyers and create an uncontested divorce environment as they divide up assets in the event of divorce. Prenups have various structures, from quick, page-length contracts to elaborate, specific prenups. A useful one being one with 2 sections. The first section contains conditions of property each spouse brings into the relationship, future property, and custody for current and future children. The second section contains modified conditions of property and child custody if a party were to sue with cause due to adultery, abuse, etc. For example, the first section may state, if a woman brings a Ferrari into the relationship, she gets to take it out. However, the second section may revoke this privilege if she cheats with a mailman. These agreements shorten the divorce process by bypassing the majority of asset negotiation. But in 2001, only 5 to 10% of couples signed prenuptial agreements before entering marriage. I propose the United States require all couples to submit this dual-section prenuptial agreement when applying to obtain a marriage license. There are 3 reasons why prenups should be required. First, they act as both a divorce deterrent and a type of premarital counseling. Second, prenups will reduce the cost of divorce and financial strain on each spouse post-divorce. Lastly, These agreements will lower the trauma that children face during the divorce process by making divorces shorter and less messy. Contracts covered many of our daily activities effectively by outlining consequences if a party were to break faith. When a judge investigates a contract for its validity, he reviews it for 4 main elements: offer, consideration, acceptance, and mutuality. The offer stage is when a party makes a promise to do or refrain from doing some specified action in the future. Then, the parties consider the terms of the contract in the consideration stage. Acceptance is when the parties accept the terms of the contract. Lastly, the mutuality piece comes into play when both parties understand and agree to both the basic substance and terms of the contract. It is common for contracts to include a second section where the parties agree on the consequences of a breach of agreement if a party were to violate the terms of the contract. By this definition, marriage is a contract. However, the consequence of breach of agreement section is missing in a marital contract. The disappointing reality is that it is in human nature to break promises if there aren't any consequences to the action. Any parent knows the addition of consequences can prevent their children from breaking rules. Threatening to take away electronics should prevent them from staying up all night playing Fortnite. As marriage is a contract, marriage should outline the consequences of a breach of marital agreement due to adultery, abuse, etc. The second section of the proposed prenuptial agreement outlines these consequences. For example, a reduction of the amount of money, property, or child custody they would have previously received. Adding the common parenting tool of consequences to marriage may decrease the divorce rate by deterring spouses from breaking faith. The creation of marriage contracts provides additional benefits by revealing the intentions and perspectives of the parties. When drawing up the contract, couples must agree to the assets they will gain in the event of divorce. By observing which terms a partner values, the other partner is inclined to gain insight into the type of marriage that person desires. This conversation allows the opportunity for couples to contemplate if marriage is even the best route for their relationship. For example, couples who prioritize different parts of their life in the construction of the prenup can discuss these differences and vet them before taking the plunge. Austin lawyer Colin Newberry said, "One of the best benefits of prenuptial agreements is not the protection and disproportionate division of assets that people would imagine. It's the full disclosure and conversation prior to marriage about what you have going into the relationship and what you expect to share throughout the relationship." The conversations sparked by the prenup are comparable, but not synonymous, to premarital counseling. Premarital counseling is beneficial to a couple's future. As Mayo Clinic states, it can help ensure that you and your partner have a strong, healthy relationship, giving you a better chance of a stable and satisfying marriage. The Manpower Demonstration Research Corporation confirmed this by stating that marital education, family counseling, and related services can help improve a middle-class couple's communication and problem-solving skills, resulting initially in greater marital satisfaction and, in some cases, reduced divorce. In 2017, there was a study conducted on 3,400 couples that concluded couples who had premarital counseling had a 31% less chance of marriage failure. Although premarital counseling goes a ways further than prenuptial agreement conversations, and there's often a third party present, the conversations can't hurt. Drawing up the contract gives a needed insight into realistic expectations for marriage, thereby creating stronger, healthier couples with reduced divorce rates. Moving on to my second point, prenups will reduce the cost of divorce and financial strain on each spouse post-divorce. Divorce is extremely expensive. Initial court fees, filing fees, and many lawyer fees result in an average price tag of $15,000 to $30,000. Many lawyer fees greatly contribute to this number, as they often charge as much as $500 an hour. In 2017, there were 800,000 divorces. If you pair the number of divorces with the average cost of divorce, United States citizens spent between $20 and $24 billion on divorce in that year alone. After hearing the average cost of divorce, billboards flashing quick and easy divorce for $299 may seem like a scam, but are in earnest. Randy Kessler, chair of the American Bar Association's Family Law section, explains that those billboards usually apply to couples who have already agreed on the terms and simply need a lawyer to fill in the forms. Prenuptial agreements outline the terms, and haggling over terms is what takes the time and money. Therefore, divorces with these contracts will be less costly. The cost of divorce, coupled with the financial situation post-divorce, has actually led to poverty. The Heritage Center of Data Analysis used a 1995 survey of consumer finances to calculate that 32% of families with children living in poverty are divorced families. While this only indicates correlation, for poverty itself might be leading to marital strain, a signal that divorce might be causing poverty is that from 1972 to 2000, households of families post-divorce experienced an average drop in income of about 40%. The United States should take steps to lower the cost of divorce and help affected families by seeking solutions. While both spouses go through economic troubles post-divorce, it's worse for women. In California, a no-fault divorce, or a divorce caused by something other than adultery, abuse, etc., has led men's economic status to increase by 42% in the year following divorce, whereas women experience a 73% decrease in economic status following divorce. Just to be clear, prenups don't guarantee women a job and zero suffering post-divorce. What it does do is equalize the financial playing field by giving women the opportunity to safeguard themselves, by ensuring they will receive something substantial when the marriage ends, even if they've given up a career to raise children. With these agreements, women will no longer be shorted in divorce settlements, but instead will leave their previous homes satisfied, knowing they received exactly what they had previously agreed to. Lastly, prenuptial agreements will lower the trauma that children face in divorce by shortening the divorce process. Each year, over 1 million American children suffer the divorce of their parents. The divorce process is devastating children in more ways than just simply splitting their time between two homes. The traumatic event of the divorce process is affecting numerous children psychologically and emotionally, including many cases of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is a condition diagnosed by a person's behavior in the aftermath of a traumatic event. People with PTSD often associate harm with certain actions or objects that relate in any way to the traumatic event they experienced. A few symptoms of PTSD can be heightened anxiety sensitivity, flashbacks, bad dreams, and frightening thoughts. Children with PTSD from their parents' divorce can also have attachment issues. This attachment issue can carry on into their future relationships because they associate love with the painful memories of their parents' divorce proceedings. A few other effects of PTSD can be children wetting the bed, associating a painful memory with a song heard or a place visited during the divorce proceedings. Prenuptial agreements will lessen the trauma that children face in divorce by shortening the divorce process. The custody battle draws the process out and makes the child feel as if he's in the middle of a fight. Prenuptial agreements will lessen the pain of a custody battle because there won't be one. Prenups already state the plan for child custody before marriage. The trauma that children face in divorce can be contingent on whether the terms are uncontested or contested. Researchers have found that one of the reasons for children's negative psychological reactions to their parents' divorce is the intensity and duration of the divorce conflict. Contested divorces have high intensities with a long divorce process, and some requiring their children to testify against one of their parents in court. Carnegie Mellon University conducted a study on children who've experienced divorce. They concluded that children from contested divorces have weakened immune systems due to the psychological stress developed during the divorce proceedings. Not only do contested divorces affect child's health, but additionally, their adjustment after. Children whose parents' divorce is contested is related to a variety of adjustment problems post-divorce. Children from uncontested divorces simply do not suffer from these traumas. The Divorce Center explains that children from uncontested divorces adjust better and don't feel as if they have to choose sides in a war between parents. They also recover from the divorce quicker and feel more stable because they believe their parents' relationship is amicable. Prenuptial agreements create uncontested divorce environments for children to avoid the trauma of contested divorces and recover quickly from their parents' short divorce. I want to address an assumption that prenups allow for quick, easy divorces, making them more tempting and therefore more frequent. Yes, prenups will make divorce easier for men and women, but more importantly, for the wife being abused, the wife living with a husband who neglects her and her children, and the spouse victim to adultery. My plan is an equalizer because right now, divorce is easier for the breadwinners, the men. The men's economic status increases. According to the Hunt study, men do not experience depression post-divorce at the large rates women do. So yes, prenups will make divorce easier, but more importantly, fair for either the men or the women who previously got the short end of the stick. In 1993, professors from the University of Arizona College of Law and the Department of Psychology at the University of Virginia surveyed marriage license applicants and law students about their knowledge of divorce statutes, demographics of divorce, and expectations for their own marriage. Despite recognizing that the overall divorce rate in the population was about 40%, the respondents' median estimate for their own personal chance of divorce was 0%. The respondents and many adults today hold what's called an optimism bias, believing they are personally immune from the risks. Christians grasp a similar idea by believing that marriage is a covenant made between the couple and God, and the Bible upholds that breaking this covenant is wrong. Professor Bradley Wright, a sociologist from the University of Connecticut, conducted an analysis of self-identified Christians and the divorce rate. He found that 60% of irregular churchgoers have been divorced, and 38% of regular attendees have been divorced. Acknowledging the high probability of divorce is beneficial to marriage for non-Christians and Christians. And if a couple denies any possibility of divorce, the benefits of a prenuptial agreement are often ignored. For example, it's common knowledge that academic cheating is looked down upon. Schools still put policies in place to enforce this to their students. Handbooks address cheating, consequences are outlined, and schools take actions in classroom environments to prevent cheating. Christians likewise agree that divorce is wrong. So just as schools put policies in place to reinforce a taboo against cheating, so too the possibility of marriage failure be addressed before marriage. Throughout my time on stage tonight, around 85 couples somewhere have filed for divorce. Divorce has torn apart almost half of the families in America. In 2007, I experienced the year-long divorce of my parents. Pain, confusion, anger, stress, and fear. These words don't even begin to describe how I felt during the divorce process. I remember sitting upstairs crying while my parents fought downstairs. One Republic's Apologize was my mom's favorite song during the divorce process. She used to listen to it in the car. I still can't listen to it. Prenuptial agreements would have changed my parents' entire divorce process. It would have been quicker and less messy. These contracts aren't just about the financial assets of two people, but the emotional assets of everyone involved. Thank you.
All right, on Darby's panel tonight, We have Matt Thomas, who is the CEO of the high-tech data solutions firm JP3 here in Austin. He has been an entrepreneur, executive, and engineer in the high-tech industry for over 2 decades. Matt married his college sweetheart, Andrea, just after completing his mechanical engineering degree at Texas A&M. They have 5 children, including Veritas non-Thesis seniors Jacob and Emma, and 5th grader Jane, along with 5-year-old twin girls, Nevie and Charlotte. And he's really just an all-around cool guy. When I think of him, I'm like, you know that guy? He's a cool guy. All right, we also have Dr. John Bergeron, and he received his PhD in clinical psychology, excuse me, from UT Southwestern in Dallas, prior to completing a postdoctoral fellowship in child and adolescent psychology at Scott and White Clinic in College Station, where he went on to work as a staff psychologist for 10 years. He also worked for the nonprofit Hope for Orphans for 3 years teaching, training, and developing curriculum for foster and adoptive families. For the last 4 years, he has worked for the Austin Stone Counseling Center, where he is the director of counselor development. And I'm sure if I knew him better, I'd say he is also a very cool guy. We also have John Hallam, who is Darby's advisor, and who didn't send much in the way of a bio, but I know he's a coach and has some great kids, and he's also he's a cool guy. And we have Donaldson, who is on his second marriage. His first was obviously to hockey. So, you have a paddle in front of you. If you show me the white side, that means a new question. If you show me the red side, that means a follow-up, and I'll give you priority. So, the floor is open.
No questions?
Yeah, Alan.
Great job there. So I was wondering if you could address the issue of government overreach. I think upon hearing your argument, the idea of maybe that what you're proposing is more government intervention, maybe at the expense of personal freedom. Could you talk about that?
Of course. So prenups will actually do the opposite. It will the government will be less involved in marriage as they are today. Today, lawyers, judges, and juries decide which terms a spouse gets when the divorce occurs. With these agreements, couples will sit down and they will draw up themselves the terms they will get in the event of divorce. State laws will also not dictate how the divorce will go. Every state across the nation will have the same process with the prenups as the divorce, as the center of the divorce. Currently, in New Hampshire, you can get divorced in a single day. There's no minimum processing time or minimum residency period. In Vermont, by stark contrast, the couple must have been residents for at least a year. They must have undergone a 6-month separation, living separate from each other. And once the divorce is finalized, there's an additional 3-month waiting period once the divorce is processed, there's an additional 3-month waiting period before it's finalized. So with prenups, both the state laws will be streamlined, so less government intervention, as well as the terms for the divorce will be decided by the couple and not by a lawyer, judge, or jury.
So just to follow up with that, so you're talking about how prenups make divorce more streamlined, and that is good for lowering trauma and the cost. I want to get to cost in a little bit. But by streamlining it means you have to come up with a contract before any sort of future together. So yes, it does streamline it, but aren't you opening that up for potential big problems down the line where situations have changed in a relationship? So let's say, for example, that you design the contract so that one person will have custody of the child more than the other person. But then, let's say you end up, you don't know anything about your kids because you don't have any. Down the line, you have a child, and let's say the child has some sort of special needs that one member of the couple is more suited of dealing with than another. But you're now bound by this contract, which you had to make before you knew anything about future instances. I guess have you thought through that streamlining could also have these unintended consequences? How easy is it to change the terms based on changing facts on the ground?
So I will say one thing. Prenups can be updated like a will. If both parties agree to updating the contract, they both sign it and get it notarized, they are able to update the prenup. So if they decide that during the marriage, oh, we forgot to include this in the prenup. They are able to do this. However, if there are problems that still arise when the divorce occurs, there can always be court cases to basically get rid of the prenup. So let's say, like you were saying, a special case where there's a special needs kid, one of the parents can't deal with it, that would be a separate court case into determining what the child custody for that child would be. Currently, prenups are not allowed to include child support or child custody for that reason. The court retains the power to decide which spouse the child is best fit to live with. However, with these prenups, I believe that power will no longer be needed for two reasons. First, a big reason why the court retains the power is for financial reasons. So let's say post-divorce, the prenup says the wife gets the kids. Let's say the wife doesn't have money. She can't raise the kids with the job that she currently has. Well, with prenups, she'll be more financially stable because she will get more coming out of the divorce than women do now. So there will be less chance of a financially unfit parent. However, there still might be an emotionally unfit parent for special needs kids and things of that sort. And those types of disputes can still be determined in the court of law.
Want to commend you on the bravery of taking on something that's very close to you personally and presenting it in a very factual way. Really nice job on sort of separating out those issues. To follow up on that question, one of the statements you made is that conversations can't hurt, and but I wonder if maybe sometimes they can, especially if you're trying to have a conversation before you get married about all of the possible things that could go wrong, and if perhaps there's a sort of lack of emotional maturity that goes along with those conversations. You know, in business deals, we always talk about all the things that could go wrong up front, but it's not personal. I'm not in love with that person, right? This is a little bit different, and so I'm wondering, did you find statistics, reports from premarital counselors, any of those kinds of things to sort of back up the assertion that you're not actually causing more problems than you're solving by having those discussions up front?
So during my research, I didn't find many cases, or any, about premarital counselors stating that those conversations can hurt the couple's future well-being. However, I would argue that if emotional problems, things like that, come up before marriage, maybe they aren't fit to get married. And that's why the prenups is a huge benefit for marriage, because the couple can contemplate if marriage is the best route for their relationship. So if they're having continuous disputes and making the contract, they can vet those differences, or if they can't solve them, they won't get married.
I just had a question about if in your research you ran across any places where prenups were already mandatory, and if not, why not? And if so, what the outcome was of that?
I didn't necessarily find any stats or studies about prenups being mandatory. Currently, the couples who get prenups are often celebrities with huge amounts of money and lots of assets going into marriage. The statistics I found about this prenups and the divorce rate were actually opposite of what I was hoping it would be. Because they're celebrities with lots of money, the divorce rate is pretty high. So that I do not believe that accurately depicts what will happen with the prenups I'm proposing, since this is a new prenup that I'm proposing with the added consequences, and also when it becomes streamlined, I believe that it will decrease the divorce rate.
So you touched a little bit on, in a sense, the differences between how the state views it versus how the church and we as Christians view marriage, right? But as you contemplate the question of should we be putting prenups in place, how would you answer that the sort of fundamental reaction that probably most people in this room have, which is, Yes, but we're entering into covenant with one another that we're the two will become one flesh. And that's really what it's all about, is that, just as Christ loved his church, so man and woman are united and are a picture of that. And so sort of by addressing a prenup, it's almost as though, from a Christian standpoint, we're focusing on the wrong things. So I know you must have covered that in your research, so what would your response be to that?
I would say that even though the Bible addresses that divorce is wrong and that marriage is a covenant, 38% of regular churchgoers have been divorced. So I believe that even though it's outlined in the Bible, that doesn't mean that we aren't sinners. That doesn't mean that we don't fall short. That doesn't mean that we follow every guideline perfectly. So I believe that because the divorce rate is so high for Christians, that needs to be addressed. And I think prenups do just that by addressing this before marriage, for Christians to sit down and figure out what would happen if this were to fail.
Yeah, let's talk about that number for a second, 38%. So you said 38% of regular church attendants get divorced, whereas I think it was 60% of non-regular church attendants get divorced?
60% of irregular churchgoers and 38 regular
So
attendees.
irregular. So, I mean, that could be an argument for some sort of religious exemption to your proposal. You have the data to show that people who go to church regularly are almost half than less likely to be divorced than people who go irregularly. Do you have any sympathy for having a religious exemption to a mandatory proposal like this?
I have thought that through. And while I do believe that it's a good suggestion, I think that recognizing that 38% of Christians have been divorced is a huge thing to look out for, because that shows that so many Christians today have been divorced. Therefore, an exemption may cause more problems, and it wouldn't solve the problems that prenuptial agreements would mitigate. Divorce would still occur at these large rates with contested divorces that would draw the process out and make the child have trauma and PTSD from the process. So I believe that even though these prenups may never be used for some people, the people it would be used for is what matters.
I had a similar question along the lines of exemptions on the grounds of free speech, particularly for believers who see covenant marriage as the primary function being a statement and an image, a description of how God loves his people. By mandating that they plan for that disruption, are we not forcing people to make a statement or distorting the statement they want to make by making it mandatory?
So in my presentation, I talked about academic cheating. In the Bible, it talks about how lying is wrong and it's a sin. In Christian schools, they still put policies in place for cheating. That's, in essence, lying about a failure to be honest in the classroom environment. Christian schools still put policies in place to enforce cheating because we're not all perfect. We still fall short. So I believe that even though the Bible addresses this, and even though Christians agree on this even before marriage, that this is a covenant where this is never going to be broken, it is broken. Therefore, I still think it should be addressed.
So kind of to that point, Darby, you were talking about the second part of a typical contract, I think, and the idea of consequences if there's a breach of contract, right? Adultery being an example and so forth. So could you talk about the process that you envision for the prenuptial agreement? For instance, kind of to I think the point, do couples have to address adultery? In other words, could I say, if I was engaged and we're going through it, could we just say we're going to divide everything up evenly, do this with the kids, and not deal with the specific consequences of all the elements, whether it's adultery or whatever?
So I would say that 20 to 40% of I found that 20 to 40% of divorces, the cause being adultery. And with that large rate of divorces being caused by adultery, I don't think that an exemption with Christians of not outlining the consequences if adultery were to occur would be a beneficial thing, because so many of the divorces are caused by adultery.
Matt, do you have a question?
You know, I think we all acknowledge that the divorce is a terrible thing, and many of us have seen the effects of it in our own lives or our families' lives. And since you mentioned that in 2007 your parents got divorced, I'm assuming that, but I would like to hear you talk a little bit about the ways that you, now looking back on it, believe that in your own specific situation, if your parents had had a prenup in place, it would have both reduced the stress maybe between them during the process, and also the stress on you as a child. I know you were a lot younger, obviously, at the time.
Right.
And the second question to that is, reducing stress is one thing, being a preventative is another. So do you feel like that there was any way, shape, or form that would have actually not led to your folks being divorced? Have you talked to them about that? Kind of, what are their opinions on that matter as well?
So I would say, to your first question, whatever happens during the divorce, I believe sets the standard for the rest of the two people's relationship. So with my parents, the divorce was messy. There's a lot of tension, high intensity, long process. And throughout the years, there have been countless arguments. I believe that with prenups, the environment would be different. If you start out the divorce with low arguments, a low cost, low intensity, I believe that the years following would match that. It would be a less argument, and an amicable relationship in general. I was 5 when my parents got divorced, so if I'm going to be honest, I don't remember much about the experience. My sister also doesn't remember much about the experience. However, throughout the years, my parents have told us more stories about what went on throughout the process. And it's insane how traumatic the divorce process was on us. And I believe if there were less argument, less tension, less intensity, those traumas wouldn't have existed between my sister and I. To your second question, the circumstances were a little bit more complicated that I don't necessarily want to get into. So yeah.
So you mentioned that this was going to reduce costs in your second point. My worry is that as soon as you make something mandatory, you're going to have a ballooning of costs. If I'm a lawyer, if I'm a divorce lawyer, or if I'm somebody who makes money, you said, $200 because it's a filing fee or whatever. But as soon as it's something that has to get done, if people have to do a prenup, don't you worry that now you've sort of created a whole cottage industry, and that that costs are going to sort of balloon because you've now made something someone has to do?
So let's compare this to marriage license. In Texas, in Travis County, a marriage license is $81 filing fee. You present to the county clerk office, you get the you get the forms to fill out the marriage license, and it's $81 to turn in before you receive your marriage license. Prenups will just be an added step to that process. So practically, what it would look like is a couple presents to the county clerk office, they get the forms. Included in the forms would be a template. It would be a template for the prenup. It would include the requirements that the prenup would have, the 2 sections that I talked about earlier, and it would, in order to prevent lawyers from being involved in the construction of the prenup. So lawyers would not be involved in the construction of the prenup, therefore making it cheaper. It would be in addition to the $81, maybe $100, maybe $120, but it wouldn't be much more expensive than that.
Sorry, just to follow up with that. So what you're describing sounds like a boilerplate prenup form that that people who are getting married are filling out. So
yes.
So then, if I wanted to have a more bespoke, or if I had situations that we wanted to address and have a more detailed prenup, presumably that's going to be more expensive.
No. The template would just be an example for the couples to look at, see what the prenup could look like. They're free to make whatever prenup they desire as long as it has the 2 sections. So either way, it would be that flat filing fee of, let's say, $100 for the prenup and the marriage license.
And this is something that I and my fiance are just doing by ourselves, or are we consulting with a lawyer?
It would be by yourself. It would be by yourself. You would sign it, get it notarized, turn it back into the county clerk office. I'm trying to get lawyers as much out of the picture as possible in the construction of the prenup. So it's not really about the financial assets, but more about uniting the couple together and figuring out what they would do in the event of divorce.
I had a question about, as a psychologist who's worked with kids and worked with a lot of divorced families, I think the statistics you provide in terms of contested versus uncontested reflect reality quite well in terms of my clinical experience. What I'm wondering is there evidence that prenups would actually reduce contested versus uncontested, given that, as you stated earlier, people could still contest even the prenup, especially if there weren't lawyers involved at the very beginning?
My answer to that would be that prenups create uncontested divorce environments, unless a couple in a rare case were to contest the prenup. So if we were to look at the stats that I mentioned earlier about uncontested versus contested effects on children, the prenup effects on children would be similar to the uncontested divorces. There are not stats about prenups currently with their effects on children because prenups are rare and they mainly have to do with celebrities with lots of money and high divorce rates. So they're not a very accurate depiction of what it would do to children with these prenups.
And we're over time. Thank you, Darby.